Today we're talking about the origins of insect flight, and particularly the hypotheses as to the morphological origins of wings. There are currently four main hypotheses that are accepted, and the first one is called the epicoxal hypothesis, the second the endite-exite hypothesis, the third is the paranotal hypothesis, and the final and fourth is the paranota plus leg gene recruitment hypothesis. So let's start with the epicoxal hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that wings originated as movable abdominal gills, which are found in many aquatic insects, for instance mayflies. And according to this theory, the tracheal gills started as exits for the respiratory system, and over time they were modified into locomotive purposes, eventually developing into wings. So the gills are equipped with little winglets that are perpetually vibrating and have their own tiny straight muscles. So the hypothesis originated with Oken, O-K-E-N, at the beginning of the 19th century, and further supported by Gegenbauer in 1870, and then Woodworth 1906 and Wigglesworth 1973. So they suggested the homology between the gills and the wings. This source is according to Dudley 2000, page 268. So then we come on to the endite-exite hypothesis. This theory states that the endites and exites, which are appendages on the respective inner and outer aspects of the primitive arthropod limb, then developed into wings. So this is based on Truman mainly, and then 1946 study by Goldschmidt on Drosophila melanogaster. So this was particularly based on the gene theory, where the gene POD, when mutated, went from normal wings to what was interpreted as a triple jointed leg arrangement with some extra appendages but lacking the tarsus. Later on, this mutation was reinterpreted as strong evidence for a dorsal exite and endite fusion rather than a leg, with the appendages fitting much better with this hypothesis. Obviously, the innervation, articulation and musculature required for the evolution of wings are already present in podomeres, so that's quite a bit of evidence. Finally, the paranotal hypothesis suggests that wings originated from paranotal lobes, which are a pre-adaptation found in insect fossils, and they are believed that they're basically bumps on the thorax, and they are thought to help with stabilizing whilst hopping or falling. And evidence in favour of this hypothesis is the tendency that most insects, when they are startled whilst climbing on branches, escape by dropping onto the ground. So these lobes sort of served as parachutes, creating a lot of drag, and this would have enabled the insect to land more softly. The theory suggests that the lobes therefore grew larger and larger, and in later stages developed a joint with the thorax to become articulated, and then even later the muscles would have appeared to move these crude wings. So you've got a progressive increase in the effectiveness of wings, starting with parachuting, then gliding, and then finally active flight. However, against it is a substantial lack in the fossil record of the development of wing joints and muscles. It sort of appears that that the joints and the muscles would have spontaneously appeared. So that's a bit of an issue. So this hypothesis was first championed by Crampton in the 1960s and by many other sources, including Wooten, 1986. And finally, the last hypothesis is the paranota plus leg gene recruitment hypothesis. So as we saw in the previous hypothesis, the paranotal hypothesis, one of the main issues is the lack of joints and muscles, or at least the very abrupt appearance in the fossil record. So this final hypothesis seems to reconcile the previously incompatible alternative explanations of, on the one hand, perinatal hypothesis and the leg exite hypothesis. If you look at the legs, you'll find the expression of leg genes in insect wings, and this has been considered as conclusive evidence in favour of the leg exite hypothesis. And you can also say the same of campaniform sensilla, because you find campaniform on legs, and you could say that therefore campaniform are also found in the wings, so it would suggest the leg exite hypothesis. However, it is very possible that the wings have a tergal origin, so as proposed by the classical perinatal hypothesis, and then the wings originated as these plates, and then later in evolution became more mobile, articulated through the secondary recruitment of leg genes. So that's it for the four main hypotheses of what the morphological origin is. But now let's look at briefly why they might have evolved into wings. What is the use of developing wings? So one of the first explanations one could sort of think of for the evolution of wings is very obviously enhancing gliding performance. So it would help escaping predation, reduce impact upon fall by first increasing drag, then lift would have occurred secondarily. So that's proposed by Ellington, 1991A. It would also help with the steering. Another hypothesis is the epigamic or epigamic courtship displays for sexual advertisement. So that's Alexander and Brown, 1963. Or perhaps as nuptial gifts for potential mates, if you want a bit of a nibble. The third theory is thermal regulation. So Whaley, 1979, suggested that developing wings would increase heat exchange between the body and surrounding air. Douglas went along those lines, 1981, suggesting that the lobes could advantageously increase body temperature by absorbing solar radiation, and it also shields the body against convective heat loss. Kingsolver and Curl, 1987, actually suggested that winglets were primarily developed for thermal regulation, and then over time it slowly came to be dominated by the aerodynamic function. So really you can sort of see that they are not mutually exclusive. And finally, one interesting theory that I've sort of come across in perhaps not so many words is the idea of a nose on a stick, whereby you have a sensilla and sort of combing through the air to find the next plume allows you to have a competitive advantage in terms of finding a food source. So that's all for today.